Hello, and welcome to Metaphysical Life Support. I'm Naomi Eklund, your host, and today we're speaking with Jerry Bartkus. He is a mechanical engineer, and he is currently working on managing projects for large commercial projects. Jerry answered my call for men, especially in more traditional masculine roles, who also live a spiritual life. And I really appreciate him taking the time and being willing to talk to us. Welcome, Jerry.
Yes, nice to be here.
I really appreciate you showing up. And you've had a really rich history, and your spirituality has seemed like it's been an important part of that. Is that true?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's started at a young age. I think I mentioned that it was my parents when I was 14 in 1972. They got the whole family through Transcendental Meditation.
Well, you started out in the Catholic Church.
Oh, yes. So, yeah, I was raised Catholic, and I went to Catholic grade school and high school. But my parents were both Catholics, but, they were kind of questioning things and taking a look at other things that were happening in the world in, the early 70s. And Transcendental Meditation was one of those things.
How did that affect your experience being involved with Transcendental Meditation and going to a Catholic school? Was there kind of, were both of the Catholic Church and the TM sort of active in your life?
Well, I mean, even though I was in a Catholic school, I didn't really feel like I was that drawn in terms of a spiritual connection with the church or through Mass. And I think at maybe 14, that's about the time that you start questioning everything. And for me, anyway, the Transcendental Meditation was actually something that triggered something for me. And I said, wow, this is nice, and this is something I would like to continue doing. And so that was my start in terms of a spiritual path, and then from there take a look at other religions and other spiritual things that were going on. And again, 72 to 75 in that time frame, and that's the kind of stuff that was people were starting to look at. I guess as the outreach or the output of some of the hippie movements of that time from the 60s into the 70s, and got more mainstream.
Well, I think it's very interesting. Our paths are not unsimilar. I was also raised Catholic. So I think it was when I was about a freshman in high school, and I was listening to our religion teacher. She was a nun. And for me, it was this idea that unless you were baptized Catholic, you were not able to get into heaven. And because I was always very engaged in the mysticism of church, I wanted to be a priest. I loved the whole idea of service. And I think for me, the mysticism of the Catholic Church is where my interest lied more than maybe some of the teachings. And were you guys being taught similar things where, we had to have the missionaries go out and teach and baptize, or the people wouldn't get into heaven? Was that the kind of thing that was happening for you too?
Well, I mean, I'd heard that all through, I guess, my time with the church, but it wasn't something that they really stressed at school. Mm-hmm. I mean, we talked about different parts of the Bible and Jesus' life and those kinds of things, but it wasn't really heavy indoctrination that I would say. I remember maybe in, 8, 7, 6. I remember at 6th grade being in science class, and the science teacher was a nun. And she said, well, and we were talking about geology and those kinds of things. And she said, well, how long did it, did it take to form the earth? And it was kind of like, okay, here's a trick question. Do I answer, millions of years, or do I answer 7 days or 1 day? And, it just kind of created, for me, that's one of those things I kind of remember in terms of saying, how does that all fold together? And
Well, as somebody who thinks like an engineer, that makes sense.
right.
You need the logic of it. And that was where the disparity was for you.
Mm-hmm. Right. Right.
So for me, the exploration, I'm just a few years behind you and still in that same arc of alternative spiritual practices just coming into the mainstream. And for me, the idea that there were people who saw the world in a broader context, in a more inclusive context, that was part of what was appealing to me. So what was it like? What was this thing in the meditation, the transcendental meditation, that really clicked for you? Do you have an idea?
Oh, well, I'd say that I was going through troubled times at 14 and through high school. And, I have to go back and say back then we didn't think about it as depression, but now I would say, yes, that's what I was dealing with, as well as just general angst, I guess, over just growing up. And here was a moment in time where I meditated where that just seemed to all melt away. And that I did feel like there was some connection with maybe a higher being or whatever. And that was really the key point for me. And I said, well, I didn't get that in church. So that's really, I think, the defining point was just that there was something different and it felt good. So it
It
was
also
more of an
feels like it was more
expectation.
internal for you.
Yes,
The
definitely.
church was out there and the TM brought you in here. That it sounds like that has a sort of a basic difference.
Yeah, I mean, I would say with the Catholic Church and most of the Christian-based churches, that there is that separation between the priest and the people. So just like what you were saying is that, you had that connection that wanted to push you towards being a priest. Maybe that was part of that issue, was you were trying to bridge from, just sitting in the pew and listening to stuff to actually being more of a participant,
Right.
And I do realize now, much, much later, that, I mean, the church could be more, I guess, participatory in that. I mean, prayer is meditation, but it's not taught like that. It's just like taught as, okay, this is what you have to do and do it right.
It's
So,
not taught like that, or it wasn't taught like that when we were being taught. I think the churches have tried to make some progress and incorporate some of these other ideas. But I can definitely say from my experience that it was very similar to yours, where the hierarchy was very clear and we were as far from God as you could possibly be. Which didn't feel good. I remember it took me probably until my 20s when I was studying shamanism. And something came to me and somebody said, well, why do you always put yourself last? And these words came into my head and it was like, well, I was taught that it was God and then others and then me. But that was in direct disagreement with my inner feeling that God was in me. So how could it be God out there, then others, then me, if God wasn't in me? And for me, the meditations, now I have not done transcendental meditation. I've done other kinds of meditation, but that's where it is. It's like finding the God inside of me. And I think that sometimes we can use these tools even within a belief system, so you can use you can use a meditation tool even if you are in a church. If you want to stay in a church, you can still use that tool to get closer It doesn't have to take you away from your church,
Mm-hmm.
so that you can find that inner voice with whatever kind of external guidance you like. Let me ask you a little bit, because I am not that familiar with TM, and you've been really humble and clear about the fact that you're not a teacher. And so acknowledging that to our audience, that this is one man's experience. So when you moved into the TM, what would be, is it like a mental focus that brings you into another part of you, or is there a mantra? Can you tell us just a little bit about what that's like?
Yes, I mean, it is very connected with Indian Vedic style type of meditation. And in this case, it is about clearing the mind and sitting still, and then using a mantra in this case, where it helps you to focus. So I've done lots of other meditations, of course, with breath as well, where you follow the breath, and also with visualizing different symbols. So there's, it's basically all, I think, doing the same thing. It's just trying to clear your mind for a bit, slow down, the world, and really concentrate and reconnect with you inside. So I think that's where there is the definite benefit of being able to shut that inner dialogue for a bit. And but even some of the other meditation is kind of like they say, well, it's not to shut off the dialogue. Sometimes you just need to let it run. And that's where you get into more of the meditating without a goal. So you don't want to be able to put that kind of pressure on yourself to say, well, I meditated poorly today, or I meditated well today. It's just, you meditated, and that's what you experienced, and then you yourself put those labels on there. But again, it's a process, and it's interesting what happens.
I think that's a key point for our listeners or our viewers, is that meditation is a very personal process. And, you brought up a few points that I think are really so valuable to share. One being that as Westerners, now I don't have an Eastern mind, so I can't tell you what an Eastern mind would do. But as Westerners, I find that we have such a hard time. It's almost like we're genetically predisposed to not sit. Mm-hmm. And there's almost a celebration. And then now we have coronavirus, and everything's on, screens all the time, and streaming information. It's like this overload that like gets us stimulated. And it's like, I've heard some people say that if I am not thinking, I don't feel like I'm alive, like I feel dead. Mm-hmm. And I think that there's a validity to that, because one of the things that will happen, is my experience in sitting with meditation, is you start to feel safe in your own skin. But that doesn't happen immediately, because we're taught not to be safe in our skin. Mm-hmm. And, using the breath, or using a mantra, or using the mind as a focal point, kind of helps to keep us out of the chaos and just condition ourselves to be in our own skin.
Right. And I would say that even taking a hike in nature, you can basically have the same kind of experience. It doesn't have to be exactly sitting in a chair. Nature is one of those things where you do kind of stop the monkey mind from going, and you can sit there and then just enjoy it, and do feel connected to something outside of yourself, but also have that connection inside.
So I love that you say that, because that speaks to sort of the Buddhist idea of carry water, chop wood. Like,
Mhm.
do what you're doing and do it wholly. And that is its own kind of meditation.
Oh, absolutely.
And for some people having that thing to focus their mind on is the answer. And for some people, having their body and knowing where their body is in the space is the only way that they can get that deeply into their own connection. And then we start talking about identity. And if everything around us reinforces our identity, and then you go into the woods, what does that tell you about your identity?
Mhm.
So have you found that the movement is really helpful to you? Do you do a lot of moving meditation?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't do Tai Chi, but I've done Qigong and I've done yoga poses, but movement as well. I've done a lot of work meditation. So, like you say, chop wood, carry water. And, you can also just pull this into work. We were talking about that before. I do a lot of computer entry, and sometimes it's just cut and paste and enter data and check data. And it's very boring and repetitive. And, you can let your mind say, oh, wow, this is just pure crap. But at the same time, you can turn that into a spiritual experiment, I guess, in terms of just saying, okay, well, I've got to do this. So how do I move through that? And I'd say that you can apply that to just about everything. Sometimes doing the dishes for me is one of those things that's is kind of relaxing and is kind of a part of meditation. I'm trying to apply that with the rest of my house.
So I think what you're talking about there is like the principle of, instead of resisting, accepting, instead of, judging, like you were saying earlier, good or a bad meditation, accepting that it was a meditation, and not kind of moving out of the labeling of things.
Yes. I mean, there's a lot of things, it's going to be different for each person, but, sometimes that's what happens during meditation, but also feeling that resistance. So, I mean, especially with this stay-at-home isolation, it really hit me hard the first couple of 3 or 4 weeks. And it took me a while to kind of readjust and do better with it. So that's what I did. I just kind of took a look at it in terms of saying, okay, well, what's going on and how do I feel? And maybe I had to check in with myself more often throughout the day. It was trying to force more of a routine for myself so that I could be a little bit more disciplined with my time. And then it became kind of a game to say, okay, well, how do I optimize all of this? And how do I fold all of this kind of stuff together? I mean, movement for me is one of those things that's very therapeutic. And I usually play hockey, and I'm not able to do that during this isolation time. So that's a way that I process a lot of stuff that's going on in my life. And I'm not able to do that. So now it's like, okay, I've got to do something else and make that work. So
Thank you. I want to pick that up in our next segment. What I'd like to do right now is wrap this segment up and speak to the audience, and then we'll be right back with the second segment. I want to pick up on that energy of the balance between accepting and doing, and what seems passive to some people but is really not. So just a second. We'll be right back. Thank you for being here with us today. My name is Naomi Eklund, and this is Metaphysical Life Support. Please remember to like, share, comment, and subscribe so we can continue to bring interesting videos that help you on your spiritual journey, talking about tools and introducing you to people who may inspire you. Thank you so much.